暗く荒れ果てた部屋の中、カプセルの中に漂う人影が見えるだろうか。彼女の名はアイシー。彼女には記憶も過去も存在しない。そして暗闇の中で彼女は目覚めた。
If there is any video game genre in the vast landscape of creativity available within the modern age of gaming that I would personally define as fun, right down to the core elements, I would always have to show a soft spot for the action-packed hack-and-slash genre, with some fantastic titles such as Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance and the Devil May Cry franchise, especially with 3 and 4, and the respective special editions of each. Heck, I'd even be willing to include the fluency and visceral feel of DMC Devil May Cry there if it weren't for, well, you know, amazing characters and atrociously poor enemy design.
And I got a bigger dick.
But either way, love these games or hate them, their iconic status and awe-inspiring intense action, and the ability to let the player truly feel like they're in control of the pace and the flow of the game, stringing together combos and special moves in flashy ways, alongside the goofy storylines and enjoyable archetypes structured by the protagonists and antagonists of such games, again, not you, make for an experience to be truly remembered. In a similar fashion, I've always enjoyed the stylistic gameplay choices of a genre heralding the title of Metroidvania, a strewn-together moniker of earlier gaming titles such as Metroid and Castlevania respectively, with the key progenitors in this regard being titles such as Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Super Metroid, and Metroid Fusion. These games create a very unique and oppressive atmosphere that tests the player's attention in both the combat aspects and the dungeon-crawling maze-like structure to the overworld that has no shortage of rewards for the types of players who like to find themselves wandering off the beaten path every now and again. The combat itself in these respective titles take a back seat to the exploration, and so it doesn't find itself to be as refined for pulling off really flashy sequences that would go well with a colour filter applied in post-production with some Linkin Park blasting in the background, which ought to do well on YouTube in 2009.
Watch the window, right out the window.
Equally, however, the tables are turned with the hack-and-slash titles, as their more linear level design only serves as a backdrop to the satisfying combat present within the context of the game, usually serving as shorter playthroughs with multitudes of replay value to satiate one's lust for more difficult challenges down the road, if they so choose to advance through the game as such. Now, you may think to yourself, why am I talking about two entirely different genres that happen to be polar opposites of each other in a rather summarized way? Well, that's because I found myself utterly intrigued, and quite honestly surprised at a small indie game that I stumbled across, and its name was ICEY. Now, let's get this out of the way before we begin. ICEY is a pretty cool game. Damn it. Yeah, sorry, that's the pun this review started on. You'll have to deal with it, I'm afraid. Smash the like button, by the way. Upon playing ICEY, I was immediately reminded of another indie game I'd played quite a few years back, by the name of Dust: An Elysian Tale, as both titles tick almost all of the same boxes, barring a few key differences here and there, and both give the same satisfying feel to taking out hordes of enemies, albeit with ICEY taking the crown for being the more hyperactive cousin who ate one too many gummy vitamins earlier this morning. To give a breakdown of ICEY and the overall impressions this game left me with, I need to start with the core elements of what truly makes this game tick. And that would be the combat, and let me tell you that the combat is truly remarkable to play and to witness. tight and responsive controls, with the clear and distinct visual cues create a perfect balance of difficulty and player control, leaving every and all situations entirely in your favor as the person holding the controller and the cyborg wielding the sword. The game has a neat dash mechanic integrated smoothly into the gameplay, which acts as a means of transport around the world and a dodge mid-combat, which helps you get around the screen much quicker during fights, and a well-timed dash can trigger an insta-kill attack on most enemies with the right execution. The immersive sense this creates is unparalleled by most games, leaving a lasting impression, and acknowledging that any mistakes the player makes is their fault, as the harsh realities of life go, and it's up to you to pick yourself back up and learn from your mistakes, to overcome the obstacles that stand before you. I will say, however, that I do have a slight nitpicky point to make with the controls, so bear with me. They're perfect, don't get me wrong, as everything is exactly where it needs to be, but there is such a thing as too perfect. You see, when using a joystick, games have a null part of the field where the stick rests, known as the dead zone, where inputs are not registered until the joystick leaves the zone, taking into account the distance from the center of the area and transmitting your input to the game accordingly. Some games have a smaller dead zone than others, but most games stick with a fairly universal area as not to feel like there's too much or too little effort to be put in by the player in order to provoke a response from the game. ICEY's dead zone seems to be way too small, at least for me, as the Xbox 360 controller I used has the left stick slightly off center, but it's never been a problem for a single game I've ever played beforehand, and ICEY is the first game that I've ever had to correct myself from accidentally moving left half the time because my stick rests several degrees away from where it should. Again, nitpicky, but worth bringing up just in case. The story of ICEY is one of vague and transparent mystery, as the moment you begin the game, you're transported through a desolate and abandoned world in complete wreckage, on a quest to kill a man by the name of Judas. And where I'd love to compliment the main story itself, it's a little bit too ambiguous to really find yourself invested in. The narrator in the story presents discrete tidbits around the world, as there are Easter eggs littered around the world that presents the story of what happened before you arrived. But for the most part, you'll find yourself wandering from point A to B, destroying many robots along the way to find this Judas character. Where I'm fairly negative on the story itself, to judge it by that alone would be nothing more than a foolish misunderstanding, as the apparent story only serves as a backup to what I feel is the main bread and butter of the narrative experience. The story isn't about Judas or his lackeys, about the decrepit world or even ICEY herself, but instead, it's about the narrator, the faceless person who guides you through the experience, who makes your goal clear from the start. And this is where ICEY's utterly brilliant storytelling method shines forth, as it rears its true intelligence through the incredibly engaging utilization of the fourth wall in the game's Easter eggs. The breaking of the fourth wall in any form of media is a delicate process, as it is nothing more than a self-aware jab at the viewer in the real world to remind you that it's nothing more than fiction, whilst using comedy as a forefront to evoke a response of intellect and wit. It's incredibly easy to screw things like this up, and to make it look like nothing more than a cheap response from the viewer, with all tensity falling flat on its face from the get-go. This makes it difficult to place in a serious situation entirely, but to break the fourth wall and maintain immersion within the medium, that's just downright impossible, right? Well, ICEY actually did it. The absolute mad lad.
そうさ、私のことを少しでも理解してくれるとありがたい。見てくれ、このゲームを作り込んでいたら、私はこんなにも痩せてしまった。まあよ、ここまで頑張ったら、10年の青春を捧げたんだから。ああ、星5つのレビューをつけたりなんかしてくれると、こんな感じでね。
The Easter eggs give more context to the overarching story in the background, meaning you're rewarded in multiple ways for finding these secrets, given they're not that hard to find, but it makes the excess trips to these locations more than worth it. The experience of ICEY is one that is quite linear, but it doesn't stop you from going off the beaten path and finding out little hints and secrets for yourself, at the dismay of the narrator, both physically and mentally, making for some moments of hilarity and complete ridiculousness.
私を信じてくれ、信じてくれ、お願いだ。やべえ。あ、いや、違うんだ。いや、違わないが、そうさ、色を塗り忘れたんだ。完成！早速チェックだ。何かが足りない。
Just Please, I know you'll class me as a weeaboo right now, and I'm not even going to deny that. Anime makes me too lazy to make videos half the time, so you'd be right to call me a filthy weeb and a heathen, but hear me out. Please, please, make sure the narrator is in Japanese. For some reason, the English narrator, who I'm fairly certain is the game's developer, just doesn't stick right with me, as it sounds so scripted.
Oh, ICEY, you're about to take the stage. With ICEY's defeat of Jack, she can rest easy as she pursues Judas. Yes, the gates to Ultimopolis are What? How is this possible? How did you get here? How could you... It's fine. Forget it. It's not a big deal. Just keep following the arrow.
Whereas the Japanese guy has a lot of emotion and feeling in his voice, like he's truly invested in his role.
おいただの水たまりだからこれ飛び込んでどうするつもりだなぜだなぜ準備ができたと言わないここまで来て私をからかっているのか終わりがエンディングが目の前にあるんだがまさかそんな奇跡のようなことが起こるとはよしそれに敬意を表して特別な報酬を送ろう
Don't get me wrong, I don't think the English narrator does a bad job. It's just, he sounds more like the kind of guy who'd be really good at commentating sports or something. And comedy doesn't seem like his strong suit. I'm sorry. Also, there's a Chinese one as well, but that option beats the heck out of me. One more aspect to talk about would be the enemy design and bosses. They're alright, I guess? They don't really go beyond quite standardized, futuristic, sentient drones and robots with larger appendages, with the only real mixture being that two of them confuse together and form an overly ridiculous enemy with a lot more health than before. Also, the little flying ones can go burn in a fire. The bosses don't really break new grounds either, being large robots of varying body types, some of which eventually get rehashed into standard enemies in the late game areas, which feels a little bit lame. Certain fights like Jack and Idion have much more unique fields to them, but nothing really stops you from dodging their telegraph moves and hacking away at them until their health bar drops to 0. With this being said, it doesn't stop any part of the combat from feeling any less satisfying, and the visceral action is almost too incredible to witness. It's just a shame we couldn't have seen more varied enemy design. Finally, the soundtrack is standard, albeit forgettable, as the techno beats and smooth subtlety in its presentation means it acts as a stigmatic background melody, given it isn't exactly Devil May Cry levels of immersion that makes you want to go out there and style on some demons. It does become fairly grating after repeating the same area a few times over, such as the Clock Tower elevator Easter egg. As I was playing on the hardest difficulty, and I got wombo comboed for the little flying enemies over and over, which kept meaning that I died to the larger enemies in one hit after they successfully worn me down. And whenever you fail, you have to trek all the way back to that area, past two giant dudes, then you also have to wait some time for the elevator to be activated, just so you can try again, and then get killed by the flying enemies again. So sorry if I'm not too enthusiastic about certain parts of the soundtrack. Listen, I played Toho on the regular. I have a fairly high standard for background music in games, thanks to that franchise, okay? Let's just hope those new EU laws on banning memes doesn't mean that the random music Leroy found online doesn't get this game disheveled, yeah? So, would I recommend this game? Absolutely, as it's something that certainly needs to be experienced. It's fun, over the top, and more importantly, it feels so good to play. Normally, people give some kind of rating at the end of these, don't they? Well, if you really need one, I'd give it 8 loops out of the Fruit Loops cat. There you go. Happy now? Okay, good. Now subscribe so I can contemplate the meaning of mortal existence to a wider audience. Thank you.